Hey guys, welcome back. This week we're going to be doing lesson 12 in our Ready workbook. So we're going to be on page 121. If you don't have your Ready workbook out and ready to go, take a minute, pause the video, make sure you have your Ready workbook out. You will also need a writing utensil, so a pen or a pencil. And if you have a yellow highlighter, I would suggest using that as well. All right, so whenever you are ready to go, we will get started. So since this is the introduction, we're starting a new lesson. The first thing we have to do is put a box around the title of our lesson. And the title of this lesson is Determining Word Meanings. If you remember from last week, we did lesson 9 on analyzing word meanings. So these two lessons really go hand in hand. Last week we were analyzing, this week we are determining. So I'm going to rewrite the title of this lesson up at the top. We've got determining word meanings. So next, I am going to start breaking down this title. Determining, I know, means to figure something out. So I'm going to make myself a note. It means to figure out. And word meanings, as we know, there are a few things to go along with word meanings. We've got connotative and figurative. We are leaving the technical out of this one because if you notice down here where we have our standard, we are back to our RL standard. So this is our literature standard. Which means that we're going to be primarily focusing on connotative and figurative word meanings, and we're going to leave out technical because that falls more in line with our informational text standards. So since we know that this is our literature standard, we are going to go back to focusing on fiction, and we know that stuff that is fiction is not real, it's fake. And since I know that I am going to be focusing on word meanings again this week, connotative and figurative, I know that tone has a lot to do with connotative and figurative word meanings. And we have three different feelings associated with tone. We have positive, negative, and neutral. And just to refresh, tone is how the author feels about the topic that they're writing about. They're going to let us know how they feel by using connotative and figurative words. They're going to have these feelings to back them up, and that's what we're going to try to figure out in this lesson. So let's go ahead and get started with our introduction. Sorry guys, let's look at our theme. Get a little ahead of myself. Our theme for this lesson, lesson 12, is going to be the city and the country. So every text that we're going to look at is going to have something to do with the city and the country. And those kind of contrast each other, right? They're very different. So we'll get to that and we will see how contrasting and similar they are as we go. Okay, now we are finally ready for our introduction. So follow along with me, guys. Here's a question you've probably asked. What does a word mean? You can usually answer it by looking up the word in the dictionary, but words and phrases have meanings. I'm going to underline that because that's important. They have meanings beyond their dictionary definition, specifically connotative and figurative meanings. So these are the two that we're focusing on. Once again, connotative and figurative. So this paragraph is saying that words and phrases have meanings that go a little bit deeper than what the dictionary definition of the word or phrase says. So, especially connotative and figurative. So, let's look at this paragraph next about connotative meaning. So, the connotative meaning of a word or phrase is the feeling it tends to produce. So, it's the feeling behind the word. So think about three words people often use to describe big cities: lively, crammed, and busy. A lively city sounds like a fun place, right? It's where you want to be. A crammed city sounds like it might be uncomfortable. If it's crammed, you might feel claustrophobic. You don't want to be there. And a busy city doesn't sound either fun or uncomfortable. It's kind of neutral feeling, right? So it sounds just like a city, nothing more. Lively has good connotation, crammed has bad one, and busy a neutral one. So all three of those words can describe a city, but they each have a different feeling behind them. They each have a different tone. So positive, negative, or neutral associated with their meanings, right? So now let's kind of move on to figurative. So authors also use figurative language to express ideas or experiences vividly. So before we move on, let's make a list to remember some of our different types of figurative language. So we've got similes, we've got metaphor, we've got hyperboles, and we have allusions, we've got idioms, and we've got personification. So each of these are different. These are all different types of figurative language authors can use. So figurative language is used to express ideas or experiences vividly. A common type of figurative language involves imaginative comparison, which is finding an unusual way that two different things seem to be alike. You can understand most figurative language by identifying what is compared and thinking about the effect of that comparison. So figurative language usually it's going to show us how two things seem to be alike. In most figurative language, we can be identified by thinking about what's being compared, what's being contrasted, and the effect of the comparison of the two. Okay, so down below, we have a little passage and some directions to go along with it. So we have to read the passage. As we do, we have to notice imaginative comparisons the author makes. So, imaginative comparisons. And I'll go ahead and tell you this is a reference to our figurative word meanings. Okay, so let's look at this passage that we are supposed to go through in order to find our imaginative comparisons. So I'm going to put some little brackets around the passage so we know that we're going to read it. So I'm going to read it out loud to us. As we're reading, I want you to look for different types of figurative language. Think about those imaginative comparisons. Look for things that are being compared with another and underline them as we read. And I'm going to underline them too, and we'll see what we can find. All right, here we go. As I stood atop the mighty skyscraper, a gentle breeze wrapped its arm around me. Down below, the people were as small as ants, and the cars were toys making their way through a miniature city. Muffled sounds floated up like balloons. The wind murmured softly, and a bird called from somewhere in the distance. All right, so as we were reading, I found several different types of figurative language. If you don't know the type of figurative language that it is immediately, that's okay. Sometimes you have to look at it and really think about it in order to be able to figure out what type of figurative language, that's okay. But these were just a few that I noticed. So the first one I underlined was a gentle breeze wrapped its arm around me. A gentle breeze wrapped its arm around me. So this, I'll go ahead and tell you, if you're curious, this is personification. Personification is when you give human characteristics to something that is not human. So the breeze apparently is wrapping its arms around the narrator. Now, Does a breeze have arms? Can it wrap those imaginary arms around a person? No. A breeze is not something that's alive, right? It doesn't have feelings or emotions. It doesn't have body parts like arms, so it can't actually wrap its arms around anything because it doesn't have those. That's how we know this is personification, because it's treating the wind like it were an alive human being when it's not. Okay? The next one I underlined was the phrase as small as ants. As small as ants. This is a simile because it is comparing the people over here, right? They're saying that they were as small as ants. So we know this is a simile because it's comparing the people to ants using the words like or as. And if you notice here, it's using the word as. So that's our simile. Next, I underlined the cars were toys. So it's saying that the cars are toys, right? So that's an imaginative comparison, and this type of comparison is a metaphor. It's saying that the cars are actually toys. It's not saying they are like toys, it's saying they are toys. And that's how I know this is a metaphor. So next, sounds floated up like balloons. So the sounds are floating to the sky like they were balloons. So it's comparing the sounds to balloons. And I know that this is a simile because it is comparing using the word like or as. And it has like in this one. So I circled that for us. So we know this is a simile. So next we have the wind murmured softly. Wind murmuring. If you are curious what murmuring is, it's like almost like a whisper. So the wind is actually, it's the sentence makes it seem like the wind is talking, but wind can't actually talk, right? So because it's not a human being. So we know that this is personification. All right, so we have thoroughly looked at this passage. We have picked out our imaginative comparisons, and we have talked about the types of figurative language that they are. So we are ready to move on to the chart that's down at the bottom of the page. So let's look at our directions first. The chart below contains examples of figurative language from the passage. Study the first row and then complete the empty section. So, our job is to make sure we can go through this chart, make sure we understand what's going on in it, and then fill out the empty sections. So, this chart is separated into 3 columns. The first column, those are our examples from the text above. So, they all come from this text up here. We have to figure out what is actually being compared in the example. So, what is being compared? And then we have to determine the effect of the comparison. So, why does the author do this? Okay, so let's look at the first row together. Our example from the passage is a gentle breeze wrapped its arms around me. And I'm going to make us a note out to the side. We already said that this one was personification because it's wrapping its arms, right? So these are some of the key words that I noticed. Gentle, wrapped arms around me. Okay, so what is being compared? So the breeze is being compared to a person's arms, right? So it says the gentle breeze wrapped its arm around me. That almost makes it feel like you are being embraced in like a hug, right? So we know the breeze is being compared to the person's arms. Um and just for fun, let's talk about the tone that's associated with this. If the breeze is gentle and it's wrapping its arms around you like it's almost giving you a hug, do you think that's positive, negative, or neutral tone? I'm gonna say that's more positive. Hugs are usually a good thing, right? And if the breeze is gentle, it's kind of nice, right? So that's positive. So what's being compared is the breeze to the person's arms. Now let's talk about the effect of that comparison. What effect do we get by comparing the breeze to a person's arm? Why does the author do this? So the author does this to make the breeze seem calming and pleasant, like a hug, just like we mentioned before. And that seems very positive, right? So that has some positive tone associated with it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next row and work it out just the same way. So here we have the cars were toys. So the cars were toys. And just like we mentioned before, this is a metaphor. Okay, so we have to talk about what is being compared next. And this one's pretty simple. The cars and the toys are being compared. It's saying that the cars are toys, right? So what is the effect of this comparison? What is the effect? Why does the author compare the cars to toys? Well, it's to make the cars seem tiny when viewed from above. So whenever you're standing on a skyscraper like they are in the passage and you're looking down, everything below you is going to seem very very small, even stuff that's really large in real life. So the author does this to make the cars seem tiny when viewed from above. Okay. And the cars were toys. The cars were toys. All right, so now let's look on to the last one. Muffled sounds floated up like balloons. And before we have already said that this is a simile. So we have to figure out what is being compared first. So what's being compared? The sounds actually are being compared to the balloons, right? Because it says that the sounds floated up like they were balloons. They're not really balloons, right? But it's like they were balloons. So the balloons and the muffled sounds are what is being compared. So now we have to think of the effect of the comparison. Why do you think the author used this simile? Why did they compare muffled sounds to balloons? Well, it's to make the sounds seem quiet, soft, or even delicate. So when you think about a balloon, what do you think about? Usually balloons, they can be pretty delicate, right? They're very light, airy. They're gonna float, right, if you fill them up with helium. So they can even be kind of delicate in a way. You have to be careful with balloons because they can pop, right? So it kind of makes us feel like they are kind of delicate. So if the sounds are like balloons lifting up in the air, maybe the sounds are quiet, soft, or delicate. Usually sounds of the city, if you're in the middle of a bustling city, maybe they wouldn't sound like this, but from the top of top of a skyscraper, they could very well sound like muffled sounds could sound just like floating balloons, right? So, I'm going to say that the author does this to make the sounds seem quiet, soft, or even delicate. Okay, so now let's look down below. So the question, what does the word mean, is a little more interesting than it might seem. Reading becomes richer when you pay attention to these extra meanings, So if you are a good reader, or if you're learning to be a good reader, connotative and figurative language is going to help us figure out what the author means. Okay, so I think we are ready to go ahead and wrap up our introduction, part 1 to lesson 12, determining word meanings. If you have questions about anything that we discussed in this video, or you're curious and you feel like you need to know more, feel free to leave a comment on Google Classroom or shoot me an email. I'm always available to help you out. All right, so stay tuned for part 2, and I'll talk to you guys pretty soon.